I'm Chris Wren, I'm the CEO, for those that don't know, of the British Chamber of Commerce, more familiarly known as BritCham here in Indonesia. It gives me great pleasure to act as MC for this particular event in partnership with our longtime member, ICAEW. So this is an ICAEW in collaboration with BritCham as we take Indonesia 2024 economic outlook and future directions. Of course, lots of people are preoccupied by this thing called the general election or presidential election. We certainly as a Chamber of Commerce are very much aware that businesses tend to use this sort of time as an opportunity for, or an excuse for procrastination. There tends to be a vacuum in decision making and inertia, and it's not just here in Indonesia. Already the possibility of an election in the UK towards the end of the year, and I think in Australia very, very soon, is causing a similar sort of approach. But of course, that actually is what businesses are doing, simply putting off the inevitable. It's a great pleasure today to have a speaker that's going to look at the macro situation of Indonesia, because whoever comes in as president, actually, the attractiveness of this market for market access in terms of opportunities in the short, medium and long term is not going to change. If anything, it's going to gravitate to looking better vis-a-vis other economies in Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific in general. So I look forward very, very much to the presentation that is to come. Once again, I thank very, very much ICAEW for having the confidence to work with BritCham, for us to be working with them in managing this event together. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to invite the lead for ICAEW here in Indonesia, Conny, to offer her own words of welcome to you, our audience. Conny.
Good morning and welcome everyone. I'm Conny Siahaan. I'm the ICAEW head of Indonesia, and it's truly delightful to see each of you here at our first event of the year at the Fairmont Jakarta. Now, before we dive into the discussion, for those of you who are unfamiliar with ICAEW, allow me to give you a quick introduction to the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, or ICAEW. With over a century of history, ICAEW is a global professional membership organization. And with a global network of over 150,000 members spanning 150 countries, we are dedicated to fostering excellence, integrity, and expertise in accountancy. Some of our members, our ICAEW Chartered Accountants, are here with us today. Thank you for coming, Mr. Gavin Roberts, and of course, our session moderator today, Bapak Roger Finnie. In Indonesia, we are working very closely with universities, with employers, government, other professional accountancy organizations, and of course, other key stakeholders such as BritCham, to advance the accounting profession, to support our members and future leaders. And also thank you for joining us. I can see here Bapak Ibu representatives of IAI, IAP, IAMI, and AFA. Today, we are honored to host an event aligned with our commitment to knowledge sharing. And it is a privilege to welcome our main speaker for today, Dr. Wael Mansour, the Senior Economist of the World Bank. And I believe that his insights will provide a comprehensive understanding of Indonesia's outlook in 2024. And as mentioned earlier, our distinguished ICAEW member, Bapak Roger Finnie FCA, the CEO of Bloomberg Technoz, will lead the discussion after the presentation, and I'm confident that we will have a very engaging conversation. Last but not least, special thanks to Pak Wren and BritCham Indonesia for collaborating with us today and for always providing a platform for industry leaders, professionals, and experts to exchange ideas and have meaningful dialogues. Let's actively participate, ask questions, and engage in the discussion. And thank you for joining us. Enjoy the breakfast, and I wish you all a productive and enlightening session ahead. Thank you, and back to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Connie. So now it gives me a great pleasure to formally introduce and welcome to you our speaker for this morning, Dr. Wael Mansour, who is Senior Economist at the World Bank. Dr. Wael is Senior Economist at the Macroeconomics, Trade and Investment Global Practice of the World Bank. He's currently the cluster lead for macroeconomics in the Jakarta office. Dr. Wael specializes in topics linked to macroeconomic and fiscal studies, as well as growth strategy analytics. Dr. Wael has worked in several regions across the world, from East Asia, West Africa, and the Middle East, including on many natural resource dependent economies, needless to say, extremely similar to Indonesia. Dr. Wael holds a PhD in economics from no other than a British university, very consistent with ICAEW and BritCham, the University of Sussex in the UK, and is a published author in several academic and policy journals. Ladies and gentlemen, to provide us with insightful analysis relating to Indonesia's economic outlook 2024 and to guide us with regards to future directions, please do welcome Dr. Wael Mansour.
Thank you very much. Do I see the clicker? All right. Thank you very much for the invite. Let me first thank ICAEW, BritCham for really inviting me to speak in this event. It's very hard to talk about the Indonesian economy when the experts are really in the room. So I'll try to give a little bit of an overview of what we think based on the World Bank's recently published Indonesia economic prospect. So really what I'll try to do in this talk is talk a little bit first about the economic context, how recent economic developments in 2023 have happened and how they impact 2024. Then I'll go in the second part to look at the government response, the macro policy responses, monetary policy, fiscal policy, and then we'll talk about the outlook and the structural reforms needed going forward. The headline message that I wanted to come out of this presentation and maybe have a discussion around it is that strong domestic demand in Indonesia has been supported by prudent macro policy on one hand, commodity windfalls on the other, and then, however, this growth now is being challenged by scarring effects that remain from the COVID period and volatility of external pressure. And all of these pressures will have to be put in a context, not only in a cyclical context, but in a structural aspect if Indonesia wants to achieve this target of high income economy by 2045. So I will try in my presentation to talk about the cyclical component, what is happening in the short term, but also more emphasize the structural element of the constraints in the Indonesian economy. So the post-pandemic recovery in terms of growth has been a solid one, not only for Indonesia, but for East Asia in general. Most major economies in this region have picked up from where they left. If you look at the chart on the left, we see Indonesia's GDP relevant to its pre-pandemic is much higher. The economy today is, in terms of size, is at the largest point ever. And it has grew, GDP has grew 12% in 2023 compared to its 2019 level. I mean, it's only surpassed by Vietnam and China, but really, after 7 quarters of 5% growth, Indonesia comes out as one of the emerging markets that has performed the best. And actually, because of this growth performance, Indonesia have just become graduated from a low middle income economy to a high middle income economy, and it did so, if you look at the number of years, at a faster pace than a lot of other emerging markets. We're talking about Brazil, Turkey, surely the big emerging market that Indonesia is compared to usually. And this growth was primarily driven by pent-up demand that was released, increased mobility. We've seen a services sector that has grown, benefited from private consumption, but also because in the past 2 years, Indonesia lived a commodity boom. We've seen terms of trade improve, basically coal, CPO have improved, but also exports of manufacturing goods. So really the past 2 years have been characterized by catch-up in demand from the pandemic, and add to that a positive terms of trade shock, commodity windfalls basically, that has supported all this consumption. Now the focus turns on how to graduate from this high middle income economy into the ambitious target that Indonesia has, the Indonesian government has put, is to become a high income country by 2045. Now, there are difficulties to that, because if you look at the trend to the left and you compare the pre-pandemic GDP trend, not level trend, and the actual GDP, you will see that there is a gap. This is a gap that is estimated around, I can't see the number from the flag, but 360. Yeah. So you get the number here. Around 7% of a gap, meaning that the economy could have been higher had it not been to the structural problems that the COVID imposed. And this is basically loss in human capital. In a previous publication, we quantified some of these losses to education. There was a loss in investment. And all of these have affected, if you want, the productivity downward. Why is productivity important? Because it also affects the future growth, what is called the growth potential, which compared similar to other emerging markets and even advanced economy, has been declining in the past decade, but that surely took a hit from the pandemic. And you can look that even the recovery had some structural constraints. If you look at labor market development, yes, unemployment is down, yes, labor force participation has increased, but we have seen that, you know, there are problems in middle class paying jobs, where the share of jobs created as what we call middle income, middle class jobs have actually declined. And this is because a lot of the job creation happened in low value added services. And this is something that would impact this sector. And why is this gap important to remedy through structural reforms? And we talk about which structural reforms. Because think of it this way, if you're going up into a mountain and then you injured yourself, let's think of COVID as, you know, an injury. It becomes harder to go up to the top of the mountain, the 2045 high income country target. You have to remedy this injury on the way up and accelerate the pace of growth. So the 5% that Indonesia has had is an excellent growth number, but the country can do more and should do more if it wants to achieve this high income target. So this gap we've estimated at around $360 per household per year. Let me talk about some of the positives, because good news is that inflation has started to moderate. Because if we take this analogy of going up the mountain, think about inflation as being rain. The more there's rain, the harder it is to get to the top of the mountain. But the good news is that inflation has started to moderate. There's a supply angle to it because of the government intervention to kind of unlock some of the supply bottlenecks, especially in the food component. Partly because also, you know, oil prices and energy prices have been softening lately. But not only that, is not only headline inflation on the left-hand side, but also core inflation. So demand, if you want, core inflation is the inflation generated domestically, which is basically a reflection of demand. That has been coming down because, you know, the boom is now over, we're normalizing, we're going back to a normal rate, and both indicators of inflation are back within the Bank of Indonesia target. But there's still what we call cost push factors that are risks really, and this is the global crisis. We've seen, you know, shortages in global food. We've seen international prices of sugar, of rice rising up. This is the right-hand figure because of the climatic effects of El Nino, because of the supply side constraint that was imposed from the Russia war on Ukraine. The previous high energy prices, which makes cost of production high. But we have to give a good testament to the Indonesian government that it has managed to work at the sub-regional level to look at these supply bottlenecks, and it made sure that, you know, especially rice and sugar is available to control if you want prices. But still, there are inflationary pressures coming from outside. Now we've done also a little bit of analysis, which I won't go into the detail there in our latest report. Is that there's even those cyclical drivers of inflation are not felt in the same way across the country, and this is because, you know, these price differentials rise from the logistics cost, the market integration. The more you are outside of Jakarta Jakarta, or the big urban center, the higher the cost of living in relative terms because of these still infrastructure gaps, these logistics costs that are high. So this is one area to focus on. Now, while we have looked at the domestic part, and we've seen that domestic demand has been picking up, inflation has been coming down. However, this has come within a turbulent global environment. Actually, if you look at the external position of Indonesia, which is the current account balance on the right, we see that the current account balance has turned into a negative current account, into a deficit, a negative deficit, at the start of the second half. And this is because this is when commodity prices started softening, so you had less exports along with rising imports because of demand. But the problem is not the current account deficit itself. The deficit is not a problem. The major issue is how do you finance it? And this is where the biggest pressure comes currently, because cost of financing and the availability of financing globally is becoming an issue. Why? Because Federal Reserves and the European Central Bank and that's economy central banks have all hiked up interest rate, which has affected emerging markets, and we've seen large capital outflows from emerging markets into advanced economies, including in outflows from Indonesia. And those pressures, became the most intense around September, October. These 2-3 months, we've seen the largest outflows from the country. So the pressures on this financial account has been visible, and that what puts pressure on exchange rates. We've seen a slight devaluation of the IDR. We've also seen pressures on the foreign currency reserve because of this outflow. But what is two things that are noteworthy. One is that FDI has remained stable. So this is something that in previous episodes of Indonesia we haven't seen. Like if you compare to the period of 2013, the paper tantrum, where there was a large capital outflows that led to a huge depreciation and problems on the financial market. This has not been the case here because you had a domestic economy that could finance the budget, a deeper domestic market, but also because FDI levels has been stable. Now they are not at the level where they should be at a higher level than the 1.5% of GDP if we want to talk about high growth. But they have been consistent, they have been stable. This is a long-term type of financing, and they've been the largest component of external financing in Indonesia. The second point is that we've seen a lot of outflows, also not in terms of portfolio or equity, but we've seen a lot of Indonesian companies paying down external debt, foreign debt, and for the first time, net foreign assets became negative, which means that Indonesians have purchased assets abroad more than foreigners purchased assets here, which is an interesting observation when you look at the balance of payment. And it's also a testament, actually, that maybe there are issues related to the deepness of the financial sector. Maybe because Indonesian investors could prefer foreign assets as opposed to companies investing in the domestic financial market. It has been growing, but financial debt is one area of structural reforms that we talk about. But overall, pressures pressures are coming from abroad, but in terms of external position, it remains strong, much less volatile than other ASEAN country or emerging markets. And those external pressure, you know, in December, January, has started to abate with all the discussion with the Federal Reserve is seeking to eventually lower its interest rate. Now, if we look at how, given those cyclical recovery in demand and some of the structural problems for output, which came from previous shocks from the pandemic, how did the policy of the government respond? Well, overall, both monetary policy and fiscal policy has been very prudent and have been geared towards building buffers. Now, if you look at, let's start with the central bank response. The central bank faced if you want, a policy dilemma. And the dilemma is the following, is that the higher interest rates in the US requires monetary tightening, requires the central bank to raise interest rates to be able to attract more portfolio inflows, or if you want, limit the outflows that are going on. But also the cooling of inflation and the normalization of demand that we have seen, especially in the second half, requires usually a more monetary easing. So there are tension in the policy direction. Do I raise interest rate and kind of preserve my foreign currency reserves, prevent those outflows, or do I support growth through lowering interest rate and lowering the cost of borrowing domestically? Now, the central bank did the right thing by raising the interest rate. I think their main concern was really to keep this adequacy level of the foreign currency, the least possible volatility on the exchange rate, and they've been following successively raising the interest rate, and it reached 6%, which is an interest rate in real terms with a 3% inflation, 6% interest rate. It's a real interest rate of 3%. This is one of the highest borrowing costs. So the central bank has positioned stability over growth, which is a very commendable policy position given this external environment. Now, there are structural issues here again. Just to show you the cyclical and the structural interlinkages, is that, you know, the response of raising interest rates so affects more the interbank rate, but as you go to the response on credit volume, we see less and less response, which means that the rise in interest rate does not, the monetary channel, if you want, from interest rate to credit is not working perfectly. And this is due to structural reasons, basically the large informality of firms and the depthness of the financial market that affect them. But the central bank has been conscious on putting more measures to support this growth. If in interest rate terms, they were more focused on the stability part and attracting foreign currency, they managed to put in place some measures to sustain liquidity and support a little bit lending. For example, reducing the required reserve requirements. They had looser prudential requirements for mortgages on car loans, mortgages, etc. So they've used more liquidity type of instruments to support this growth. Now, this is on the monetary side. On the other side, fiscal policy also remains very, very prudent. Like until October, actually the fiscal balance was still in surplus. And if you look at the results that were announced early in January by the Ministry of Finance, the fiscal deficit was only 1.7%, compared to a target that was in the budget law of 2.8%. So basically what happened is that there was an outperformance in the revenues part because of, basically commodity windfalls, but also an improved collection, especially in the VAT side. But the part that is less, if you want, one could debate about is really the spending side. Revenues in Indonesia and spending remain one of the lowest around emerging markets, and we've seen that fiscal policy has been really good at spending on social safety nets, on external shock, but it hasn't yet reached the efficiency of spending on pro-growth programs. That's why we see a low public investment spending, even the subnational transfer where most of this service delivery happen. A lot of the analysis show that there are, public financial management constraints where spending is slower, and one could talk about the quality of spending there. So overall, we are at a position, though, from a macro perspective, where the government remains committed to the below, if you want, the fiscal room. And public debt is on a declining trend. They're now at around 37 or 38% of GDP, which is a good buffer if you want to build buffers. That means you have space to intervene in the long term, because debt overhang. If countries with high debt, like many emerging markets, is like, think of it as, again, to this analogy of going up the mountain. Debt is like debt overhang is like the gale winds, right, that come and forces you back. In Indonesia, they've managed to put this on a declining trend, so they have the fiscal buffer to use if they want. The question becomes is how can fiscal policy become more active as opposed to reactive? Because globally, monetary, 5 minutes left. Yes, I can still see that far. Because globally, really, monetary policies their hands are tied, right? They have to look what's happening globally on the interest rate. They can't just be too accommodating because of this sensitivity of emerging markets to capital flow. So really the burden of growth, if you want, falls more on fiscal policy. And when we're saying that, it's not necessarily that you need to record big deficits or not. It's look at quality of spending, push public spending towards pro-growth programs, infrastructure gaps, etc., and raise the revenue ceiling so that you can be able to spend. Now, let me talk about the last part. How do we see this economy? This projection of ours is actually the baseline. So we have a average reform scenario, not the high case. So we're estimating that the economy would normalize a little bit. We're now living in the post-pandemic recovery world and the end of the commodity boom cycle. So we're factoring in growth at 4.9 to 5%. We believe that price inflation will continue to be within the Bank of Indonesia target, more on the upper side because of these volatile cost push inflation factors that are coming. We are anticipating that fiscal prudence will remain. We don't know what the new administration will do, but historically in the past decade, fiscally the country has been very, the fiscal policy has been run on a prudent basis, so there's no indications or sign that this will change. Hence, we're going to find that the central government debt will remain around the 37% of GDP, which is a good level. And finally, the new thing is that we're going back to the current account deficit, which was the normal position for in Indonesia prior to the pandemic, which also means that we have to think about the financing items, hence the importance of attracting more long-term financing, external long-term financing. And my last slide is to achieve the 2045 target. We believe that Indonesia could accelerate potential growth through enhanced competition. And what do we mean by that? Is that there are three types of reforms or big buckets of reform. There's what we call factor accumulation, is that when a country invests a lot on access of services, of human capital, basic infrastructure, macroeconomic stability. This is something that Indonesia has done well. They have secured the basics, and if you compare Indonesia to comparator countries, they did well on macroeconomic stability, on basic governance, on basic infrastructure, even access to basic human capital remains good. And that's what propelled the country from a low-income economy to an upper-middle-income economy. However, going forward, it's the next generation of reform that is more complicated. These are what we call the efficiency driver, how to allocate resources from the least productive side of the economy to the most productive side. And this is, if you want, the reforms that are linked to business regulations, to labor market flexibility, deepening of the financial sector, trade openness, competition. So these are basically reforms that deepen markets. They're more complex in nature because the complexities of a bigger economy and a more advanced economy. And typically the third wave of reforms, which do happen in conjunction, is actually the innovation driver, research and development, business sophistication. So it's really a combination of both, allowing markets to operate in a more efficient way, and thinking more about innovation, technology, digital. So the next frontier of the economy. And this is possible, And I think I want to emphasize three important reforms that have happened that that the current administration has took, and that we're monitoring quite closely to see if the implementation happened. There's three big laws that were voted. One is the job creation omnibus law, which basically allows for a deepening of market, opening up markets, attracting FDI, but also looks at all this business environment, business facilitation angle. There's the financial sector omnibus law, which is a very important law to discuss financial deepening. And here we're not talking about the banking sector, we're talking about the financial infrastructure as a whole, banking, non-banking. And the third one is really the tax harmonization law, which aims at boosting domestic revenues to deepen the tax base, enlarge the tax base, enlarge the tax envelope, which would allow the government to spend more on pro-growth and pro-growth. So it is possible to achieve the program, but it would require the next generation of reform and moving from the cyclical aspect into focusing on structural reform. And thank you.
Pak Wael, 5 minutes means 5 minutes. That was 5 minutes 35 seconds.
Didn't get British punctuality.
Thank you very, very much indeed. A very practical, very matter-of-fact summary of where the Indonesian economy is, how it's progressed during pandemic times, and the direction in which it is heading. And in terms of the direction in which we are heading, that is to invite Roger Finnie up to the stage to act as our moderator for Q&A. And hopefully there's been a lot of thought provoked and questions stimulated, and we'd like you to participate in a very, very vibrant session. Just a quick introduction to Roger, who is very well known to BritCham. He is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, ICAEW, and a 40-year member, having joined as a student accountant in 1984. Take a good look. Can you imagine that as a student accountant? I can. He also serves on the Institute's International Business Committee, which provides input and insights to ICAEW's management and on developments affecting its members in business. Roger has been based in the Asia-Pacific region for the past 35 years and is currently the CEO for Bloomberg Technoz. It gives me great pleasure to welcome, as our moderator for our Q&A session, and to summarise one or two highlights from Wael, Roger Finnie.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to sit here for the Q&A, and so I'd like to invite Wael to come back up to the stage. We have around 45 minutes for the Q&A. Appreciate we're running a little bit late, but we'll go to the 45 minutes rather than the 10 o'clock that we originally scheduled, so that we can cover off some very interesting points. I will be inviting questions from the floor fairly early, so if you could please think about the questions that have been prompted by that very interesting introduction and presentation from Dr. Wael. And we'll go to those questions fairly shortly. Introduce yourself and please ask a fairly prompt question so that we can gain insights as the majority of the time. The benefit of that one I can't quite get going. So, economist but not technologist. So I think in the presentation you touched a little bit about the 5% growth in Indonesia, and also on the improving revenues for the government in terms of tax collections. But if we look back to those countries that failed to escape the middle income trap and perhaps missed the benefit of their resource allocations back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and perhaps the growth at 5% isn't sufficient to pull Indonesia out. And the tax revenues, I think the latest report I saw was it's somewhere around 10% of GDP, and regionally you have countries at 25, 30% of GDP and able to drive domestic reform and investment more strongly because of that. Where do you see some targets for Indonesia? Should we expect a higher rate of growth? And if so, where can the government find that extra 0.5%, 1%? And the importance of tax revenues as a share of GDP.
Thank you. The 5% growth, now we have to put things also in a relative context. If you ask anyone today in the economics field, you say a country is growing by 5%, that's a remarkable achievement to start with, given the global environment. And if you benchmark Indonesia against emerging markets, advanced economies, they're at the higher spectrum of growth. But again, the relative part is that Indonesia has this ambitious target, high income economy in 2045. And as you all know, the government has selected 2045 because this will be around the inflection point of the population. So the idea is to become richer by the time the population ages. And that's why, if you put this in the relative terms, the 5% become insufficient to reach this level. And I think, achieving 6 and 7%, even in government presentation, when Bapenas or the other put the medium-term plan, you could see one of the graphs that is quoted a lot is that the exponential growth that would happen, and this could happen if we embark on what I call the efficiency drivers of the economy and deepening markets. Indonesia has been a country that has been looking more inwards as a big market, etc. Now we have to move more towards creating higher value added in a lot of sectors and competing globally if you want to have the 7-8%. This is, for example, how Korea did it. This is how India did it in the 90s when they opened up their sectors. So we are really talking about those market efficiency reforms. Now, where the tax reforms are important is because this fact that to achieve those you still need large public investments to close the infrastructure gap. I mean, the country has done well, especially in terms of road connectivity, but it's a very big country that requires a lot of infrastructure. I mean, we were talking, for example, that only 20%, for example, of Indonesians are connected to piped water. That's one statistic that is an area of investment. We've talked about in our discussion, we talked about talent and human capital. That requires investment, not in terms of building more schools, but in terms of putting more technology in schools, investing in teachers, investing in students, looking at the quality of education at all levels. And the 7% growth requires a labor force that is more trained, more equipped to that. And this is where raising revenues will allow you to maintain this macro stability that is important for any country and be more proactive in investing in growth. So bottom line, I think tax reforms are important. They're at 10-11%. I think there's a lot of estimates on that it could be 5 to 6% of GDP more, right? So that's a big amount of money that you can invest. But more important is these structural reforms in market, and I named 3 in my presentation.
And also, perhaps the logistical. Everybody wants to hear from you, but not from me. The logistical connections to the country. I mean, I think there was some reports about cabotage and shipping, and still the very much dependence upon local shipping, for instance. How important is this going to be in terms of connecting the country and giving access to goods and services and things across?
Actually, connecting domestic markets is what pushed Indonesia from this low income to middle income. Now, obviously, the challenges of being such a huge country, archipelago, is big. So you need much more investment. I mean, on the cabotage part, we've talked about it. Other country experiences show that when you open this sector up for competition, you usually get more returns. Now, I don't know the details of this sector in particular, but there are, good examples. I mean, India now has opened, for example, its cabotage law to foreign investment. The idea is what can give you more connectivity at a lower cost, so that the cost of living for people outside of these big urban center could, and what could also help you in your external trade. So I would think of it from an opportunity perspective as opposed from a nationalistic perspective.
And I guess that connection extends to internet, all of those basic services. Okay, I'm going to quote you back one of your colleagues, Inder McGill, senior VP at the World Bank, who's quoted as opining, without the major correction, the 2020s will be a decade of lost opportunities. We're now in 2024, and we have a year where many of the major economies have elections coming up, and elections tend to be a brake on policy and driving economies. Is this lost decade a given, or are there some actions which can be taken in the short term to help recover the growth that clearly has been missed across the world during the first part of the decade?
I think my colleague, who was the chief economist of the bank, was referring to really the global prospects. Because if you look at the global economy, and I'm talking about Indonesia, if you look at the global economy, most emerging markets have, or even low-income countries have high debt, high cost of borrowing, currency volatility, there's trade is being disrupted, we're seeing one conflict after another. So we really live in a world that is becoming less connected, more expensive, and more volatile. And these asynchronous shocks affect, if you want, countries' ability to invest in growth and think about growth reforms. Now, this is the main messages that my colleague was referring to in the last decade. But that's why I'm saying in the case of Indonesia, relatively they managed to absorb these shocks, right? To manage these shocks. They managed to put a 5% growth. It's one of the more stable economies in terms of currency volatility. Yes, I mean the rupiah goes up, goes down, but we haven't seen wild shifts like, for example, we saw in Turkey, which is a comparator country to Indonesia. So Indonesia could bank on this stability, right? So there is an opportunity for Indonesia to bank on its macro stability and political stability to push forward on reform. It has the size of the economy, it has the financial buffers to do it. That's why I'm talking about the relative term. And I think for Indonesia, the anchor is really this 2045, which goes again with the population inflation, right? And focusing on this target will become really a driver. Now, and this is the challenge that the next administration, whomever it will be, will face. Because a lot of the low-hanging fruits in terms of growth and pent-up demand, etc., has been achieved. I mean, this country has gone a lot of changes in the past decade or more. Now the harder part is, you became a middle-income country, upper middle-income country. Getting a 5% on a $1.6 trillion economy is much harder.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the floor. Christoph, I see you've got your hand up ready there, if you'd like to start, and then we'll come to here first, next. We have a microphone?
Hello, my name is Christoph. I'm a researcher actually. I have thank you for the event. Congratulations, Roger, for launching Bloomberg Technoz. It's very interesting media, new media in Indonesia. I have 2 points. The first one, I would like to have your opinion on or your views on the Indonesian Sovereign Fund. Indonesian Authority.
Christoph, maybe just a little bit louder. I think.
The first point I would like to mention is what are your views on the Indonesian Sovereign Fund? How does the bank see it? The second question is related to I just launched my book on Indonesia's foreign policy towards Africa. with Barbara Macmillan, and I would like to have your opinion. The Indonesian government has tried to promote its industrialization policy and to collaborate with African countries on this topic. Do you see any synergies on that aspect, or how could Asian countries or Indonesia and Africa collaborate on this issue? Do you see potentialities or something? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question. Do you want to take a few, or should I answer? Please go ahead. Okay. So on the sovereign fund, I don't have a lot to say. I mean, we don't have a position really. It's referring to the INA, I guess. It's quite an interesting structure, right? Sovereign funds are typically funds that collect, excess windfalls from commodities. They invest abroad. In this case, it's a fund that has public assets, state-owned enterprise, etc. So I'm not quite familiar of another example of how these funds operate. I mean, it's always a good idea to invest in the future, but we have to look at the risk profile that the fund will be taking, what kind of projects they will entail. Two things are important usually in sovereign wealth fund. One is that they don't compete with public investment or domestic private sector. That's why a lot of funds tend to go into more larger project or attract private sector within. They don't go into public infrastructure. And the second part is that the risk to it, because this is not a fund that is financed by commodities, basically windfalls. This is more assets of SOEs. So what happens if these SOEs become distressed, for example? I'm not saying that they are, but the structure is an interesting one to look at. On the question of industrial policy, I think the idea of creating value added is very commendable. What we are saying is that modern industry is also linked to services, so the diversification of industry is important to have a bigger, wider value chain, and not necessarily a value chain that is connected only to Indonesia, but it could be regional, it could be global, it could be with African countries. The problem with the African continent is that do you have countries, and I'm excluding part of North Africa here, Morocco, Tunisia, who have an industrial base and actually are connected to Europe. So I think more the relationship is through importing raw material. I don't know if there's markets, big markets enough to attract. Obviously, it's one of the important, maybe a frontier market that would open. But what I can say really is that, in terms of this industrial policy question is, how do you make it more efficient? How does it create value added? How does it create jobs? And how also allows for other sectors, especially in the service sector, to flourish? And these are the questions that Indonesia will have to answer.
I think maybe just to add a little bit on the second part of that, a lot of the initiative is also opening up markets for Indonesian companies to then be able to export. I think that Indonesia has come through obviously a rising economic situation. Many of those African countries are in the same curve, but a little bit behind it, and so there is a commonality in terms of market for consumers that I think the government would like to open up and help the manufacturing base of Indonesia grow and increase the exports. And you talked about services. If I've read my numbers correctly, I think one of the reasons why the current account has become negative has been the inward services, import services to Indonesia in recent months coming back, outstripping the increase in exports that the country is receiving.
This is an important point, but let me just add to your first point, is actually the whole discussion that we hear in Indonesia and globally is who will inherit China, right? So there's a big competition on firms getting out of China and settling up, and we hear Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, they're all in the race to attract. And there's an opportunity to get good. I mean, it's a world that is becoming, where value chains are moving out slowly from China, setting up other places. It's an opportunity. That's why those, structural reforms are important to attract parts of this value chains here in the most stable country. And there's also a case to be made, and I think this administration has started making it. There is a case for more ASEAN type of cooperation in this industrial policy, trade policies, services. I mean, this is a big block of countries that could cooperate well together and have a tradition of cooperating. But the focus, we talk a lot about industrial policy in Indonesia, downstreaming, they're all important, but you're right. I mean, the services economy is the biggest here, and there are downstreaming, if you want, or creation of value added in these services. I mean, I point one, healthcare, take healthcare, which is one of the biggest services, where a lot of Indonesians are actually going to Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, getting healthcare, and this country could open up, and they've actually voted the healthcare omnibus law very recently that could open up the sector. That's a huge area of investment. Banking is another, financial sector, fintech, etc. I think there's not enough attention, or it should be. There should be more focus on the services sector and the linkages of the services sector, because this is where the jobs are being created more. And the problem is, as I said in my presentation, if you look at the labor trends, there's more jobs being created in the services sector, but they're coming mostly now in the low value added one. There's much to be done on the low value added. And this is, services sector is actually the supply side. If you improve those companies, you deepen those sector, actually it would force also human capital to improve. Because it's not only what you teach people, it's how they train, and the training in companies that are more sophisticated, etc., where you build this human capital. So I think it's a big area, and some of the companies here are actually in it, so they're more the experts on it.
Okay, we had a question here. Sorry, you've had a long way, and we'll come back to you. We'll come over to you in a minute.
Thank you. My name is Ersa Triwayuni. I'm representing Eurasian Institute of Management Accountant. Thank you for the opportunity. Dr. Mansour, I agree with you that 2045 marks a very important milestone for Indonesia as we are celebrating our 100th year of independence. And that, as you mentioned, there are the projections to reach, to leave the middle income trap is by achieving 7% of growth, which is very, very difficult unless you said that Indonesia approaching different market outside Indonesia. But the industrializations to 2045 require a lot of energy. On the other hand, the governments have net zero emission target to 2060. So there are only 15 years from 2045 to 2060 to reach net zero emission. I'm just wondering, when the World Bank make a projection, do you consider the net zero emissions by the governments? Many people are skeptical whether the government is really going to achieve that, especially after the renewable energy mix has been reduced from 22% to 17%. And our energy company, our electricity company still rely on coal very much. When World Bank make a projections, what kind of net zero emission or sustainability elements that you are consider, and does World Bank confidence that eventually Indonesia will achieve net zero emission by 2060? Thank you.
You've hit the $1 million question, as they say. Listen, we've done some of this simulation in what we call in our report that was published recently called the Country Climate Report on Indonesia. And we've we've shown in those macro simulations that, you know, it is feasible to decouple growth in Indonesia from, you know, carbon emission, and that's the whole debate in the global globally today, is that how do you decouple this, and should you decouple this? And I think we've shown in that report that there are enablers of doing it. For example, if you put more incentives for renewable, if you invest in geothermal, if you invest in reforestation, which is what Indonesia has done. So what are the biggest three emitters, right, in Indonesia? You have the deforestation part, you have the energy part, so it's coal intensive, and you have the transport at third. You know, this whole, for example, EV battery agenda is actually supposed to help the transport sector. Now, it is energy intensive, you know, but you have instruments to deal with that. You have carbon taxes, carbon market, etc., that could collect money, reinvest in other areas that are more clean, reinvest in renewable. There's mega projects coming in terms of the big hydro that the government is thinking about, that would require investment. So when we do these projections, yes, we take into consideration that. And actually, the whole green economy is actually a new economy that generates growth and jobs. And I think, you know, I would refer you to this report. It's called the CCDR, the Climate Country Development Report, which actually has a detailed account on not only the projection, but some of the green. I give you an example. For example, there's a lot of restriction to import green technology here because of, you know, local content requirement and licensing and regulation, like similar to other types of import. So allow, for example, for more flexible import of these technology. That would help. And companies are adopting more and more green. You know, couple of I don't know if you noticed last week. I came to my office because it was raining, and I saw for the first time, our offices are in SCBD, and it was the first time I see the mountain. You know, it was such a clear sky, there's a mountain there, and I was like, it's the first time, it's like, wow. And I looked at this parameter of pollution, and it was the lowest in decade because of the rain. Now it's back from green to yellow. But there are health costs, etc. There's a lot that can be done.
And I think with Chris, we had a roundtable 2 years ago, talking to several companies that are working in this area, and I think the big thing, linking back to one of your earlier drives, was human capital. Having a base of people who are very understanding, engineering, corporate leaders that are driving the agenda is very important, and not just the government. So the government can drive the education, but the education needs to drive the implementation and policy thinking and action by private enterprises.
I think the World Bank here is, on a global level, is trying to work with private companies and governments to create really a more open carbon market, carbon trading system. And I think this is one area where, you know, there's a global mandate that the bank is pushing that Indonesia could benefit from. There's also a drive to reduce methane, which is as dangerous as CO2, to get this back. And this linked to sustainable agriculture and other. Also, Indonesia is a partner in those discussions.
I mean, linking those two questions, Christoph, I was at an event in December, and one of the people we were talking to, their rice is one of the big rice fields. When they're left fallow, are one of the big methane emitters. And of course, Indonesia has a lot of rice. And so, you know, what are the sustainable practices, improving agriculture process and everything is really important. So it's a link. What can we learn also from overseas that are going to help us here? There was a question here, I think at the back here, so if we can get the microphone. This question was first, and then we'll come to you.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Krishna. I'm a lawyer focusing on sustainability, tech, and finance. I'm also a founder of a tech startup that is tackling electronic waste. So I have two questions. First of all, you alluded to the fact that Indonesia needed to have more high added value industry as well as competing globally, right? And you also mentioned about EV as an example of downstreaming. Now, in the case of EV, we know that there are some externalities, particularly with unsustainable nickel mining, for instance, in certain parts, right? So I'm just curious to hear from you. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the current government policy with regards to downstreaming, particularly in the EV industry, and what needs to be done going forward? The second question is more of what are your views in relation to software-based tech, particularly, right, as a way to boost up GDP as well as to improve the labor quality, as you mentioned, right? Because, for instance, with software and tech, you can enable more software developers, and there could actually be an answer to this from my point of view. Thank you so much.
Excellent question. Listen, on the downstreaming agenda, I mean, we recognize the importance of creating value addeds from commodities, right? This is what all countries should think of doing and actually do. What we are discussing is two things. One is that the industrial policy part, policy action, is a different set than the trade action. So that's the biggest tension. It's not tension, but the discussion is that do trade policies like trade ban work to push for downstreaming or not? There are other types of enablers to facilitate this industry, help attract more investment, create a more business environment to invest in those sectors, create the human capital needed. So there's a lot of other enablers, if you want, for the economy. And then second, one would also look at the climate sustainability of these investments and do cost-benefit analysis. Are we getting the benefits versus the cost? We're not taking a position of that. I mean, I think many of this the government is doing and looking at. As I said, there's also an opportunity to look at other sectors of services, servicification of the downstreaming industry. I mean, Australia, for example, which is a big mining country, has been very successful in the upstream, right, in the services for mining, and that creates even more value added per unit as opposed to the battery itself. And to do battery, you have to export, and we've seen that Indonesia is in talks with the US to kind of open the market and try to sell batteries abroad. What I'm saying is that if you want to, it's important to create value added, and it's important to export this value added, and to export it you need to open markets and have more approach. On the tech, I agree. I mean, what we need is more jobs in tech, more usage of tech in companies, and that's happening. We don't want to see, this is a trap usually that happens, is that tech is often related to the gig economy, and then you create jobs on the low value end of the stream. What you need is more higher. You need the developers, the software engineers, the services that comes to that. And you're right. I mean, putting the enablers that we've talked about, like making sectors more competitive, investing in connectivity, domestic connectivity and external connectivity, looking at services trade, looking at deepening financial sector will all help the digital economy agenda and the private sector. Question here?
Good morning. Thank you for the very hearty breakfast to ICAEW and BritCham. Dr. Wael, thank you for the insightful sharing in today's session. I'm Jovi. I'm the climate risk specialist currently with Bank Niaga. So mostly undertaking the pilot climate stress testing with our regulators. So I find your last slide particularly interesting, where you share, you laid out the indicators of our, the structural reforms that comparatively to the peers, right? So I took notice on the bottom two indicators where you highlighted there in yellow financial sector, and it's not in such a good performance. So if you have any insights or if you could share any views on that, if there's any policies that you think could be in place to help us improve. Thank you. I think that's all.
In comparison to, and this graph shows, comparative countries that are big in size, middle income. So we're not comparing it, we're comparing roughly apples to apples. And if you look at financial sector indicators in Indonesia, they come on the weak side. Look at the level of credit to GDP, level of asset deposits to GDP. On most of the metric, the financial sector in Indonesia is not as deep as the other. That's why we believe the implementation of the financial sector omnibus law is very important. It would help deepen this sector, enforce more competition in it. Because the macro prudent part is being done, has been done. Stable. So we're not in the 1998 crisis modality. There's a lot of learning that happened. It's a very stable market. We're talking about deepening, right? And deepening requires more competition, more products, more technology, more human capital in the sector itself. And I think the financial sector under this law is a huge law. There's hundreds of regulations that are still being worked on by the central bank, by the regulator, by the private sector, and I think it's the good path forward. And what enabled, there's so many benefits, not in terms of only access to finance is one, technology is second, but also on the external. We've seen from my slides that a lot of the external vulnerabilities are related to the fact that a lot of the outflows go outside of Indonesia. They go to Singapore or other, and central bank has been doing all these instruments to get these back. The coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs have kind of instituted these 30% export retention. But these are temporary measures, right? The more organic way of keeping the funds here is to have a deep financial sector where there are opportunities for investment and there's a financial intermediation that works from the big savings that are here into the economy.
So we're going to have about 10 more minutes. I appreciate that we're overrunning from the original 10 o'clock schedule finished. So before the slides here telling me I've got 2 more minutes to go, come on. We will take a couple more questions. I just have one myself. When we were chatting beforehand outside, you were commenting about the, let's say, the middle corporate structure gap. A government is very much focused on the fact that 60% of the economy, the domestic economy, is driven by small and micro enterprises. You were commenting that the gap of middle companies is something that's perhaps structurally missing. Yeah. Is that just a parameter, or is that an opportunity or prerequisite for the growth and accelerating the growth that we were talking about to move Indonesia up from this high middle income to upper income economy?
it's both a prerequisite and an opportunity. If you look at, we're going to publish the enterprise survey soon, and if you look at the results of it, and if you look at, actually I think it's even published, if you look at the distribution of firms in Indonesia, you have few big companies on the right hand side, big, and then the largest concentration are very small companies, like 60% is even below 5 employees. So you have a huge number of firms that are on the left tail of the distribution, and you really have kind of a missing middle. And this missing middle is important because these are the companies that would link the value chain from the big ones to the small ones. And economies that have managed to become high income have actually did those linkages, those medium companies that create jobs, link both ends of the spectrum, link the value chains in the sectors, pay taxes, enlarge the tax base, exactly. And you know, although informality, for example, has been coming down, but we have a paper on level and trends of informality in Indonesia that shows that, you know, output informality remains around 35%. It has declined, but you know, it's still a high level, and employment informality also remain high. So there's a big informality issue in Indonesia to talk about, and you know, structural reforms that would allow these companies, these small companies, to graduate, becomes bigger, and becomes the middle, will bring a lot of growth, a lot of job creation, and a lot of
So do you see that linked to these financial reforms, the human capital reforms, the infrastructure reforms, or is there some other direction?
It definitely is. Business facilitation is one. Access to finance is another. Use of technology is the third. Registration and how you pay taxation is the fourth. So what I wanted to say is that all of these areas are being covered in Indonesia. Like, there are work that is happening. The idea is how fast can you accelerate this work and really put it into implementation. There is a role for the government to do, but there's also a role of the private sector that is actually doing. But all of these areas are important and intertwined.
Excellent. I think we have time for one, maybe two questions, depending on how deep and long the answers are. Here? Right here? Okay, please. Already standing up. Sorry, you were hidden behind the flags.
No problem. Yeah, thank you ICAEW for inviting us, and thank you for you both panelists for the insightful presentation. My name is Marcel Swendra. I'm from Indonesian Institute of CPA or ERP. My question is, frankly, it's a really short-term projection of we are expecting election coming. See, usually in the other major democratic country, when the election coming, you see a political cycle of boom and bust. But I want your opinion whether we got an experience such as political cycle, and if this happen in Indonesia, how long will that take? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a tough question. From my observation of the situation, I think there's a lot of stability in Indonesia. Things don't happen overnight, right? Policy decisions are not taken overnight, and you all know this better. For policy to change, it takes a long time. Even when I read what the three candidates are saying on the economy, etc., there's not a lot of difference, I have to say, from what is currently being happened. I think this consensus building that Indonesia is very strong in compared to other countries prevents, if you want, this volatility in terms of political. It's not like, you know, when I listen, for example, to the US debates, presidential debates, and you find, you know, ideas that are on all spectrum, very different. If you get one president, you do X, and if you have another president, you do minus X, right? In Indonesia, at least as an external observer who doesn't know the country as well as you do, I feel there's more stability. It's more of the same. Really, I haven't heard a big change in direction. So I don't see yet maybe I'm wrong, and I'm happy to chat with you. You can tell me more the insight, but I don't see this huge volatility in the policies.
Degrees of separation rather than differences of direction. Two more questions and then we'll close. So one here and then we'll come to the lady here in the front.
Good morning, sir. So I came from India, like almost 2 decades in Indian banking system. Now last 1 year I'm into this market. I'm seeing how financial sector is behaving in this market. I found like the kind of reforms we have seen in India or say some other countries, the kind of reforms are like still missing here. It's more bureaucratic, it's like more process driven kind of a thing. When I was dealing with RBI and other government official, it was more process driven, product driven, not dependency on human kind of a thing. Here we are seeing like MFC license, they are taking so much time to get. Like, what do you think? Like, if this economy which is highly underpenetrated, only 13% are reaching out to banks for funding, what kind of reform steps has to be taken by government or say central government to make it a mainstream kind of a thing?
Right. I think again on the financial sector specific, I think the anchor is the financial sector omnibus law and the implementation of the law. The World Bank has supported that, is supporting. I think there's a lot of workshops are happening in this regard. So I think the law has been passed. The implementation is harder. The implementation requires technical changes, but also a mentality shift in the sector, and I think that has started slowly to be built.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Mansour. Very interesting sessions, and thank you, BritCham, for inviting me to join the sessions. My name is Dia. I'm from the American Chambers of Commerce. Really learning a lot from this session. I guess I have 2 quick questions. The first one is, as you mentioned about the complement between the investment policy and trade policy. My question is, what is your insight on the local content requirement policy? It seems like the government really tried to attract foreign investor by providing quote-unquote incentive, but then on the other side of probably on the private sector, it seems like a burden, not a burden, but obligations that it's not easy to comply with. The second question is, I would like to know also about your views on the development, the new capital city. Is it something that you see helping Indonesia towards the 2045 visions, or is actually poses risk on the fiscal side? And the last one probably is just comments on the structural reform that that underway for the last couple of decades. I guess we see this is a very welcoming movement. The government published or issued a couple of omnibus law. However, we see is also the importance is on the implementation side. We work closely with BritCham and other chambers. We still having some of difficulties in the private sector when the technical level at the ministry, the translation of the reform spirit can be very different. And what is your advice to ensure that the government from the top to down level having the same understanding in terms of carrying out the reform spirit? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quickly on the local content requirement, listen, the idea is we talk to a lot of investors, domestic investors, foreign investors, and everyone points out to the current system of local content requirement as being an obstacle to attract investment, to do business, etc. So actually revisiting of that. I'm not saying eliminate or it's a valid position to have, that you want more of the value added to be created domestically, etc. But some people tell us it's being done to like really the small detail of the component. They were giving me the example on solar panels, where you needed to have like solar panels that are locally made, which the industry does not exist. So it's really rethinking how do you attract the value added from imposing something that is simpler. Simpler is always better in business. So you don't want this local content requirement to be an impediment, but rather to facilitate the creation of value added. So there's a lot of nitty examples that you could change, facilitate. It's part of the business facilitation reform that should be done. And this links actually to your last question on what can it be done on the structural reform. And this is typically the dialogue between government and the private sector. And there's a big role for BritCham, Eurocham, all the Chamber of Commerce actually to come to government and have this dialogue, which you probably are having on a more structured basis, more permanent basis, to kind of relay the messages of what work, what not. And I think consultation over these laws, over this agenda is very important. Feedback is very important, and it's actually I don't know to which extent it has been happening. I don't have the knowledge. If you want the previous knowledge of how these happen, you can tell us. But I think in countries that have been successful, look at Korea, this dialogue between private and public is very deep and very frequent. And I think this is the role that you all are playing so well. On the capital, I mean, I really don't have a position on that or a comment on that, because we simply don't know enough. So I can't really comment on something I don't know.
I think last question here, please, and then we will we'll wrap up.
Good morning. I'm from President University. My name is Maria Jacinta. I don't want to make a question, but more of an appeal. Yeah, I was listening to your presentation, Mr. Mansour, and also to the comment made by Mr. Roger about industry and higher education collaboration. And I think this is one of the most important drivers for 2045 Indonesia Emas or Unggul, Indonesia Human Capital Excellence. I would like to appeal that, or this is a situation, many companies utilize our students, our graduates as interns, as people who work for them. But what we want is that companies actually go to the universities and become co-creators of knowledge. We are not just producers of knowledge, but we want to co-create with the companies. So if the companies are willing to go to the universities and actually offer services in terms of academic development, lectures and all that, the students will be very happy. I'm actually very happy with ICAEW because they've been actively promoting, auditing and other certification for our students, and we really appreciate that. But if the companies are not invited to the universities, they don't come. But you actually must try to offer your services and your support to the universities. Last month, I was talking to about 50 higher education in Region 4, and that is what they lamented. They lamented the lack of desire of companies to go to the universities and offer what they can do to help. So that is what I would like to appeal. There are many universities that need help, and the students are actually hungry. they're hungry for practitioners to go to the universities and talk about new trends and developments. Thank you.
So I think you have, on that part, I personally have done some courses at ITB. You have the Chambers of Commerce here, and I think they're an excellent channel to contact and use to reach out to the universities. They're of course working with universities in the home countries that the Chamber works with, but they're very connected within the corporate structure here with a lot of companies that are very willing to get out and put themselves in front of students, attract the students to their companies, because it is a war for talent, and it's one of the great ways to get ahead of the curve in attracting students to come and apply to your company. So I would say that that's a very good channel. I'm sure Chris, in his closing remarks, will add that on behalf of all the chambers that are represented here.
Yeah, I just want to say that we're doing much more and more as a World Bank outreach to university. The Indonesia Economic Prospects that we produce every 6 months, we're actually going to regions. We've presented in Makassar, in Medan, in Bogor, in Bandung. We're inviting more and more universities to come to attend, have a discussion with us. So we're very open to collaboration with university and academics, and actually we value that because we also get insights. We also have a lot of young economists, Indonesian economists working for the World Bank as well. So we do value this cooperation.
Okay, on that very positive note, I would like to express my sincere thank you to Dr. Wael for his very open and insightful comments. So thank you very much. A round of applause, please. So I believe the order is Conny first. They're fighting on it. One of you is going to have to stand up, and please do your closing remarks. Thank you very much. You lost that one, Chris. Rock, paper, scissors.
Actually, in the interest of time management,
Sorry.
No. It was great that the question time was kept open to provide an opportunity to everybody, and there was some great questions. It was very clear that a lot of attention was paid to the slides of Dr. Wael. But won't be any closing remarks except for me simply to say thank you once again to ICAEW for this opportunity of collaboration. There have been mentions about visits to universities and so on. BritCham has an education centre. We work with some 15 or 20 Indonesian universities, and we are constantly providing practitioners, making them available to speak to students and provide practical learning opportunities to help them on their way. Also, we have a hub, the Human Capital and Education hub as well. It's part of the value proposition of membership. If you're not a member of BritCham and would like to know more about that value proposition, the BritCham team or myself will be very, very happy to talk to you. Now, for not really a closing, but an acknowledgement of extreme appreciation, I'd like to ask Conny, head of ICAEW here in Indonesia, to present their appreciation to Dr. Wael and also to Roger. 1, 2, 3. Have a wonderful day.
That was worthwhile. Good work. Thank you. Never such thing as a free breakfast. I think if we had 50 more people in here, it would be a little bit warmer. But,
these things are always freezing.
Yeah.
It's funny.
I had all day Sunday afternoon in here. We had a presentation to coordinating ministry on a project. It was like 10 till 5 or something like that. I came home like this. Fortunately, I had my suit jacket on that day because it was really cold.
I'm very naughty at home. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Very good. Sorry, that's very quick.
Okay, I'll see you.
Sorry, I'll sit down.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes. Let me